I'm Jimmy Shuker alongside Albert Chalmers, and this is Radiant Light, a spiritual discussion podcast, episode 9, the Alan Watts Special. Alan Wilson Watts was born on the 6th of January 1915 in Chislehurst, England, and is predominantly remembered for interpreting and popularizing Eastern philosophy for a Western audience. The majority of Watts' teachings are focused on Japanese, Chinese and Indian traditions of Buddhism, Taoism and Hinduism. After moving to the USA in 1938, Watts began Zen training in New York City and went on to receive a master's degree in theology and became an Episcopal priest in 1945. Watts left the ministry in 1950 and moved to California, where he joined the faculty of the American Academy of Asian Studies. Alan Watts is famous for his many lectures of Eastern philosophy, in which he argued that Buddhism could be thought of as a form of psychotherapy to help a person's overall well-being and mental health. 3 examples of Alan Watts' most notable work are the books that he wrote, namely Behold the Spirit, 1947, The Way of Zen, 1957, and Tao, The Watercourse Way, 1975. Tao, The Watercourse Way turned out to be Watts' final book, published 2 years after his death. Watts passed away on the 16th of November 1973, aged 58 years. Watts had intended this book to have 2 additional chapters describing how Taoism could be thought of as medicine for the West, but these 2 chapters never came to be due to Watts' death. After his death, Alan Watts' talks were popularized via broadcasts and local radio, and most recently via the internet. The majority of his teachings were recorded during the 1960s and the early 1970s. It cannot be denied that Alan Watts' overall body of work has a huge spiritual influence on the Western world, on Albert and myself personally, and of course the Radiant Light podcast. Albert, let's get straight into this. You and I were obviously talking about Alan Watts before we started the show today, and you described Alan Watts as somebody who had a more optimal worldview for the 20th century.
Yeah, I mean, I think he described his own philosophy as being something of a optimized worldview, in that he took good things from different cultures and combined them, and then eliminated the I don't want to say negative, obviously, because that goes against his philosophy, but
Did you say eliminated the negative?
I won't say he eliminated the negative, but I mean to say that he didn't hold on to the traditions that were not beneficial for the 20th century.
Right, I see. Yeah, very much a person who thought with his own mind, right?
Well, the 20th century was such a turbulent and rapidly advancing century, probably the most in all of history, and just seeing all the things that humanity went through in the first half of the 20th century, I think he knew that.
So what sort of things you
like World War II, World War One, Vietnam. I mean, when Vietnam started, he was already talking about Zen in America, so he probably would have been seen as not maybe the most patriotic American, but of course we know he was British, an immigrant to the States, but he brought with him a big following of quote unquote hippies, or like flower children, those kind of people. He was primed and ready with the Western philosophy and the Eastern philosophy to combine them when the time was right, you know. And this spark that lit into a fire, he was kind of one of the people who fanned the flame during that
Yeah,
time.
like you say, what a time to be bringing Eastern philosophy to the West, right?
Well, yeah.
Mm.
I mean, they were very anti-communist, so I think they just were very defensive, and then anything that was seen as a threat, especially talking about Japanese stuff so close to soon after World War II and stuff, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So I can't imagine he was totally popular at that time, but
Mm.
he did have a more optimal worldview even for our own century. I think we're kind of catching up to him at this point with how open-minded everyone seems to be now in that sense.
Yeah.
Like, they're not gonna react the same way they would have before, like in the 1950s.
You're a little bit more well read up on Alan Watts' life and his work than I am, admittedly. Do you know of how can I put this? Like him being found abruptly, of people not reacting to him well. Do you know of stories like that? Or is this just kind of like an assumption that we're making?
I don't have any anecdotes or anything, but if you know the Republican right in the States, and the Protestant and Baptist and Christian worldview, it's kind of built in with the defense against that kind of preaching. And his preaching, like, we know he worked for he was an Episcopal preacher or whatever.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's what makes him so much of an interesting character, because he is, and he's come from a Christian background, and that's his kind of like his way of stepping into the spiritual world, a bit like ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, if he speaks on the Bible, he's read the scriptures and the literature surrounding it. He's not making it up just because he has an opposing worldview. He has blended the two quite nicely in a way, and I feel like that is frowned upon, but that is slowly dissolving over time, or at least in my own personal worldview. It took me a while maybe to warm up to that kind of thinking, but then once I did, I found it much more inclusive and much more liberating. And he actually got a negative response from a lot of the Zen guys in Japan, because
Oh, really?
because he was saying that Zazen, the sitting meditation, he said kind of turned into a fetish because they put such a heavy emphasis on Zazen that it's almost, you're looked down upon if you can't do Zazen for like several hours every day, or you know what I mean. He's much more mainstream version of Zen. They said it was kind of watered down and he wasn't actually following the true teachings. But then there's been other Zen masters, like the guy that wrote the book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind.
Yeah.
He opened up the San Francisco Zen Center, so he was a friend of Watts's, and he defended his perspective, actually.
Oh, wow. So he defended Alan Watts. Okay, so how much, I don't know if this is the rightly way to phrase it, but how much was Watts under attack?
I don't think it was ever outrageous, but that's, to me, I think that's by the nature of his own personality. Because if someone else had presented a similar philosophy at that time, I feel like they could have come under a lot more scrutiny. But because he had such a humble attitude, he never really rubbed people the wrong way. He was a friendly gentleman, and he had a way of speaking that was intoxicating and almost hypnotizing,
Yeah, he's a really eloquent speaker.
Yeah, it's seductive in a way, actually.
Oh, definitely.
In a spiritual way, not a sexual way, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, this sounds a little bit fetishy as well, but I really do love the sound of his voice. Like, in the evenings, I've fallen into a routine of kind of listening to a little bit of philosophy before I go to bed. I heard that's clearly the more healthy thing to do than staring at your phone on Instagram or whatever. And yeah, there's something quite soothing about it, and the things he talks about, he does tend to go very deep, and he gets your mind working in a different way, you know, a less logical, more spiritual way, right?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, that's one of his main things too, right? Is that in Zen, logic is looked down upon, whereas in the West, I was actually reading about that today, and it's just we've really built a fetish out of logic and mathematics and those kind of structures in the West, as we've mentioned before. But he was one of the guys that pointed that out really heavily. And
was that the Way of Zen book that you was reading today?
not that one, no. But I listened to that on audiobook actually when I had COVID, and it was about a year ago. And the story I have is that I put on a playlist of Alan Watts's lectures, and I was really ill and not feeling well at all. And normally in those moments you kind of maybe pray or you get scared or something. But having his voice on, it brought me to such a place where I was so relaxed, and I started to meditate, and I almost enjoyed it. It was kind of like a hallucination, out of body kind of deep meditation. The illness, the virus or whatever, gave me a hard fever, and I was sweating, but it was so intense. And he just kept saying, if you die, so what? You won't care. You won't be there to experience it. So it doesn't really matter. And I was just, oh, wow. It doesn't sound like nihilism. It sounds like just truth, in a sense.
Well, yeah, he had
the world keeps on turning, you know, and that's reassuring almost.
Well, yeah, he had a very different outlook on death, a very Eastern outlook, I would say. So I was listening to one of Alan Watts's lectures the other day, and I mean, he uses some really random examples. He used an example where he said if a person is being tortured, there comes a point where they've been physically tortured so badly that, and I'm paraphrasing here, there comes a point when the pain has passed the stage of being unbearable, and the person being tortured begins to cooperate with the person torturing him. And when that happens, the torturer or executioner, if you like, he knows the game is up and he's just got to kill his victim because the person's past the point. And anyway, what Watts was getting at is there comes a point when even horrendous pain like that kind of shifts, and it's no longer a negative. You know, it's become something, it's transformed into something else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Watts comes up with some mind-blowing stuff, doesn't he?
Well, I wonder where he heard that. I guess he probably heard some first-hand information on some... Yeah. But I like that because you can... In like a training scenario, you can learn to love the pain of it, and then it will become much more enjoyable. It's not the same though, as obviously.
Yeah, no way. And Watts was very eloquent with the way he put this across. You know, he clearly had an audience standing there at the time, and he said along the lines of, by all means correct me if somebody in this audience has been tortured. And then he gave the example. But I guess it's kind of like a really extreme example of the Buddhism thing about transforming suffering.
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the day, everything in this universe is energy. And energy is in fluctuation, and it transforms, and it becomes new things. And, you know, like the Buddha said, transform your suffering into enlightenment. If you've not got that suffering, then you've got nothing to transform in the first place.
That's true, yeah. It's just the kind of suffering, I guess. If it's voluntary suffering versus being tortured, where it's involuntary and non-consensual violences.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's why I said it's an really extreme example.
Well, applying it to the arena of martial arts or something where pain is just an everyday part of the path that you chose, right? If you're not doing the right transformation of the suffering, you're not going to enjoy it, and you'll never really get to the place where enlightenment occurs.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I take from that scenario that he gave. I'm sure you had a point. Maybe I missed a different point or something, but what was it about Alan Watts that first got you into it? Because when we met, we were both kind of moderately aware of his work, but then we both dived into it a lot deeper since we started talking about it. And
yeah, I kind of stumbled upon Alan Watts by accident, really.
Like on the YouTube algorithm?
Yeah, the YouTube algorithm found me. Surprise, surprise.
That's a red pill down the pipe hole, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like I've mentioned a few times before, I've often gone down the rabbit hole online, spiritual awakening, Zen Buddhism, and I guess it's just a matter of time before I come across Alan Watts, and just fell into this routine, like I said, where I'm listening to his philosophy, and I was actually a little bit seduced by the sound of his voice. Actually, we've mentioned that already, but yeah, it got me listening to him and taking in everything what he said, and just thinking about life on a more deeper spiritual level.
Really?
Yeah, let me give you an example then of how Alan Watts's philosophy and his just general outlook on life had a huge impact on me. So, firstly, to give you some context on this, when Joanna and I first met, my ex-wife Joanna, we met, what would this have been, about 10 years ago or so, and at the time I was right in the thick of my okay, so for our listeners, I'm a Chelsea supporter. I like Premier League football, and I had a season ticket. I had this for like 5 or 6 years, and at the time where I met Joanna, I'd really kind of like decorated my ego with the whole Chelsea hooligan thing. And Chelsea, we've got various rivals: Tottenham, West Ham, Leeds, Liverpool. And Liverpool in particular was kind of like the one that I attached my my ego to, my identity. It was I hate Liverpool this, Liverpool that. They were the worst, and it's just important that I point that out here for the context. Now, the irony to this as well is the year we got married, 2017, Chelsea won the league that year. Everything was good, happy point in life, just got married, and that was our thing. We met through football. We're both Chelsea supporters, and the flow of the universe just was, yep, Chelsea won the league the year we got married, yay. Now, fast forward to 2020, and this is where something Alan Watts said really had an impact on me. Now things are not going so well. This was the year where it all fell apart. I'm in the middle of a divorce. The relationship's totally not worked out. And obviously it's right in the middle of COVID as well. So anybody who's listened to previous episodes of the podcast, they know how much I love travelling. So that year it was kind of like my world had fallen apart. I couldn't get in and out of Sweden. Couldn't get back to see my family back in England. Couldn't do any travelling, and I've just got to kind of sit with this pain of going through a divorce at the same time. And it was the night before I decided to take, but the night before I took a domestic travel adventure to Gothenburg. So I'm listening to Alan Watts and I'm listening to his philosophy, not really fully knowing who he is, just that I like the sound of the guy's voice. I'm familiar with his name at this point, and you know, I find his wisdom to be quite incredible. You know, it works for me. And going through a real tough time, it's physically painful, you know, bit heartbroken. I can't, you know the situation. Now, again, I'm paraphrasing what Alan Watts said, but it was words to the effect of, the universe is always playing with you. You know, it's kind of like a dance with the universe. The universe is teasing you.
Like hide and go seek, he says, right?
Yeah, it might have been that. Yeah, again, I can't remember the exact terminology, but the message was, you know, even in the really dark times when things seem terrible, don't take it all so seriously. Relax your mind and just enjoy the way the universe is playing with you. And it's the night before I'm going to Gothenburg on my own for a little travel adventure. I'm like, okay, well, I'm having a rough time right now, but I'll put this to the test. I'm going to have an open mind. And I arrive in Gothenburg. I'm on my own. And I'm not really into football in the same way I used to be, you know, back in the old Chelsea hooligan days. And I look at my phone and I realise, oh yeah, Chelsea are playing tonight. I forgot about that. Yeah, might as well go down to the local pub and grab some food and watch it for old time's sake. So I throw on my Chelsea shirt and I attempt to walk past this pub, and it is a sea of red shirts, Liverpool fans everywhere. So, you know, I'm thinking to myself, oh, here we go. Got my Chelsea shirt on. It's like a bullseye, you know. I'm expecting to get some stick, and yeah, a few sarcastic remarks, this and that. And the last person that I went past kind of like gets talking to me on a bit more of a deeper level. How are you? What are you doing? And as I'm talking to him, I realise, oh yeah, this is a big match tonight. If Chelsea win the match, Liverpool win the league, and they haven't won the league in like 30 years at this point, so this is a big deal for them. They really want and need Chelsea to win this match.
Yeah, that's confusing, but
yeah, so okay, it's like with the league, everybody plays each other home and away.
Okay.
3 points for a win, 1 point for a draw. And the way the maths has worked, the only two teams viable that can viably win the league now are Liverpool and Manchester City. Like, everybody else has not got enough points. But if Man City need 3 points to stay within touching distance of Liverpool, so if Chelsea beat Man City, it will just be mathematically impossible.
Okay.
So
it's
like
just a weird loophole.
A little bit, yeah. It's a bit different, kind of how it works in sports across the pond. But yeah, that's the whole point. So it's like for one night only, even though Liverpool and Chelsea fans, quote unquote, hate each other, every Liverpool fan is rooting for Chelsea. You know, Liverpool can win the league tonight without kicking a ball.
Oh, so the walls between the love and the hate thing kind of fell down.
Just magically, yeah, they're transforming.
They just disappeared.
Yeah. And then just at the end of this conversation, as I'm standing outside the pub, this guy I'm talking to, he realises that I'm on my own. And he was like, "You're on your own?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he just goes, "Just get in here now." So he brings me into this pub full of Liverpool fans, and he basically announced it, and they're all local people. It's COVID times. There's just a limited capacity. Many people got turned away to be in this pub. It's a Liverpool pub, you know. It's the pub you go to in Gothenburg if you want to cheer for Liverpool.
There's a big support
it's like a thing. It was a really incredible trip, actually. going to Gothenburg. They love English football. You know, there's the Liverpool pub, the Arsenal pub, the Chelsea pub, you know.
Really?
So there I am in my Chelsea shirt with all these Liverpool fans, and I can't remember if he stood on a chair or what, but he basically announced, this guy is an Englishman from London. He supports Chelsea. He's going to sing his Chelsea songs. They're going to win us the league. And he's not paying for his own drinks all night. And that was it. It was on.
Wow.
You know, so they're...
The universe got you drunk.
Oh, wow, man. Yeah, they were buying me drinks. I'm singing the Chelsea songs, like kind of teaching them on the spot so they can get into it. And, you know, then they're singing a few Liverpool songs back. And any Chelsea fans listening to this are probably going to want to punch me. But, yeah, I'm joining in. And we're having this incredible time. And long story short, Chelsea win the match, Liverpool win the league, and the champagne's flowing. They're handing me glasses of champagne. They're celebrating with me. And I can just hear Alan Watts in my head from the night before. The universe is playing with you. Even when you're in really bad times, you know, just sit back, relax your mind, enjoy the ride. And it was just like, wow, the irony. You know, when we're getting married in the supposedly good times, Chelsea are winning the league. And now I'm like, look, I'm going through a divorce. It's like one of the worst years of my life. And look, my so-called, that team that I supposedly hate, that, you know, it was like life or death, never could lose to them. It's like, wow, the irony. Chelsea have won them the league. And these guys are so happy. And they're like buying me not bottles, but they're putting glasses of champagne in my hand and getting me to sing the Chelsea songs and everything. It was like, wow, the irony of it.
Yeah, it's like a scenario out of a movie or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I'm getting too matrixy with this now and reading too much into it, but the final thought of the whole thing, to kind of put a bow on it, if you will, is Liverpool's theme song. And Chelsea fans are really going to hate me when they see. I'll probably never be able to go to hold my head up in Stamford Bridge again. But Liverpool's like theme song, their anthem. But all these Swedish Liverpool fans that were there that day, bless them, they were singing so many of their different Liverpool songs and this and that. But I hadn't heard them sing the main one. And I said, look, like sarcastically now, I'm a bit loosened up. I said, I can't believe I'm going to do this, but there's one song you haven't sung and I'm so disappointed. And they were like, what's that? And then I just started the song and the happiness in there, and they all joined in. It was crazy. But bearing in mind, I was going through a divorce at the time. Listen to the lyrics of the Liverpool song that we sang. When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of the storm, there's a golden sky and the sweet silver song of the lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, for your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on, with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone. I don't know, maybe I'm getting too deep into this, but it was really matrixy, man.
Did you feel that in the moment, or was this a reflection, or?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, in the moment, specifically when they were drinking champagne with me towards the end, I was literally hearing Alan Watts in the back of my mind. He helped me to enjoy this moment on a much more deeper spiritual level than I otherwise would have.
That's beautiful.
I mean, think about it. If I hadn't have embraced Alan Watts, embraced Zen, even the little bit that I had at that point, my ego might have got in the way of that whole thing.
Of course it would have.
Yeah, that guy I might have been standing on the street with that guy, and he might have said to me, "Get in here," and that voice in my head, "You can't go in a Liverpool pub. What's that about?" And
that's the stuff that goes over my head, because I've never been. I used to watch the hockey with my dad and whatnot, but you know, I've sort of never attached my ego to a specific team in that same way. So I always think it's a little bit trippy and matrixy when people get so amped up and like full of love and hate and joy, and they attach their ego to the team. It's fascinating in a way.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love Chelsea.
Yeah.
To the end, they've been such a huge part of my life, but yeah.
But you kind of saw through it, right?
Yeah, kind of. Like, just saw it differently, I guess. My perspective shifted a little bit. Like, I always loved Chelsea, and I'm always checking the result. And my heart is blue. There's a special place in my heart for Chelsea. But yeah, like you say, you see it from a different perspective. In Zen, we're taught to see things plainly as what they are.
Yeah.
And like ultimately in this moment in time, it is 22 millionaires kicking a ball around.
Yeah. But you can kind of enjoy it in the moment and then be aware of what it is at the same time, I guess.
Yeah, of course.
See it for what it is, but still get a little bit. See, I would never have that experience because I don't have all the songs. I don't know all the traditions. So you allowed yourself to share a special moment, and maybe it was a spiritual moment, but you wouldn't have noticed that if you hadn't have had the Alan Watts kind of red pill you the night before or whatever. But,
yeah. I feel like that was a really huge part of growing up for me, that moment, just to kind of seeing what it is like. How can you quote unquote hate another person because they're wearing the red shirt instead of the blue shirt?
I love how it's Liverpool too, because me, I'm a big Beatles fan.
Yeah.
And this whole story, this is kind of where I see the weird coincidences, air quotes, how it was Liverpool, and Liverpool was kind of another instrumental figure in this whole bringing Eastern philosophy to the West. And they're from England, and they were in the States at the same time Alan Watts was living there, and it's kind of like the British invasion that happened during the 1960s. It's kind of, I'm connecting all the dots here in a weird way right now.
It's the 60s sound like a fascinating time to be alive.
Yeah, but when you said Liverpool, I instantly thought of the Beatles, and then I thought, wait, they kind of also did a similar thing as Alan Watts, really. So maybe that's...
Yeah, they did. Didn't you tell me about when they did their trip to India?
Yeah, exactly. They went to India, and that really popularized yoga and meditation in America.
Which year was it that they went to India?
67 maybe, something like that, right?
So right in the thick of the Alan Watts times. Like this is a movement by
this
point.
Big time. This is when the hippie thing was on fire, like in a big way. But a couple Brits from Liverpool and a guy from Christchurch or wherever.
Chislehurst,
yeah. These guys changed America in a big way. Not single-handedly, but they influenced a lot of people in their minds. Like the way they're doing to us, they were doing it even back then in the 60s. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And given what you said right at the beginning of this conversation about the historical context, you can see that, Watts was really like a pioneer, really, wasn't he?
Yeah. Well, he's still influencing our daily life in a sense. So it's pretty impressive, I would say.
Yeah, do you know, funny you should say that as well. We're talking about these little coincidences that you notice when you like you say, when you do step into the spiritual world and relax your mind a little bit and you spot things coming. But I'm just remembering another one now is a couple of Christmases ago, Joanna actually got me an Alan Watts book as a Christmas present. And she didn't even know that I like Alan Watts.
She didn't know that?
No.
Dude, you sent me that picture and I was like, oh, okay. He must have asked her for this book.
No, that was why I got so excited and posted it on Instagram
right there in the moment.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah, she did. I mean, she knew I liked Zen
Oh, okay.
and could feel that that was a bit of a movement in my life. But yeah, just the fact that it was an Alan Watts book, the guy I'm listening to every
Yeah.
night before I go to bed, it's like, wow, you know.
Well, you're attracting that energy, right? You're attracting that vibe or whatever, and that's kind of like a wink, you know, Alan Watts.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a wink from the other side kind of thing. That's awesome, man. I remember when you sent me that picture on Christmas. It's like, I guess he's having a Zen Christmas. It's hard to be Zen at Christmas, as we know. We talked about on one of the other episodes.
Yeah, we talked about that on Zen Diaries.
But that's quite a Christmas present. And it was a cool story, the way it all worked out between Alan Watts and Chelsea and you and your relationships. And
yeah, and to think about it now, getting that book as a Christmas present a couple of years later, that's almost like putting the bow on it, the little cherry on the cake of the whole story.
You've kind of reconciled, and now the universe gave it back.
Yeah.
Albert, you also mentioned to me previously that Alan Watts broke things down for you in a way where you realised that Christianity was failing you?
Well, I mean, there was a time when I was kind of really overdoing it to myself, I think, with the Christian thing.
What do you mean by overdoing it?
Just like obsessing about the Bible too much and kind of letting it take over my life in a big way. I don't say that was wrong.
Was it kind of like every person you was coming into contact with, you were kind of pushing it
Yeah,
on them a
exactly.
little bit?
And I was kind of losing my true personality in that way. It was kind of like I was trying to fake being something else that I'm not. And
A bit like attaching it to your ego in a way?
oh, definitely, for sure. But not knowing what an ego was, or thinking about ego in that same way, because when you're a Christian, you don't use the word ego. It's not part of their theology.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So I was just kind of trying to eliminate all the other worldviews and just focus on one for a while and see how that worked.
Okay.
Which is a good experiment, to be honest. It's just when I was exposed to Alan Watts, it was through a friend. He's from Vietnam. His name is David, and we kind of ran into each other, and I said we should hang out, blah, blah, blah. So we went out for some Vietnamese food or sushi or whatever, and
Nice.
we were just talking, and then I was kind of doing my thing where I bring it around into talking about the Bible, and then he was like, you know, open to it. He was listening. And then he was like, I'm kind of more into, you know, have you heard of Alan Watts? I've been listening to him. He's my guy or whatever. He's my boy. I was oh, I've heard of Alan Watts. And I think someone on the internet, I made a comment or something on one of these YouTube videos, and I would just like drop a verse from the Bible and say something, and then someone was like, haha, I guess he's never listened to Alan Watts. And I was like, well,
David said that.
no, this was on YouTube. So this is when I first heard of his name, you know. And I was like, Alan Watts. But that was like a splinter in my mind then. Because, of course, you're like, how dare they, you know, disrespect. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But later on, once I heard David say, oh, I like Alan Watts. And then I was like, well, I know David, and I like him, so maybe I should give it a chance. And then, you know, I just like being inclusive, and I want to be friends with everybody and make it work with everybody. And the worldview of an Alan Watts is much more optimal than just somebody who's hard-headed Christian and banging that drum in somebody. They call them Bible thumpers, or, you know, hardcore evangelistic kind of.
Okay.
So he kind of eased me back out of that overly tense attitude towards spirituality, I guess, which I think had good intentions, obviously. But
Was there any particular moment or thing that he said or did that kind of...
I think he told that story about the maybe, you know,
oh right, okay.
the guy with the old man and his son, and the one I told on the other episode,
on the Way of Water episode, yeah. So that was kind of like the
That was the first, you know.
He opened the door, and that gave you the opportunity to walk through.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, then I realized Zen was in a lot of the things I already liked. Just hadn't really clued in on it. But the thing I really liked about Alan Watts, aside from being open to different kinds of spirituality and the Eastern spirituality, it was also his attitude towards like your career.
Okay, what did Alan Watts say about career?
I think I played it in one of the early episodes, but it was the thing about what would you do if money was no object, and you should just do that and not worry about the money.
And that's kind of what led us to doing this podcast as well.
Well, that's just how I try to be all the time, because it made so much sense to me, and it feels wrong not to. If I say I like Alan Watts, I should at least try and take his word for it, but then actually try the stuff that he's talking about too.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not for everybody, but for me it worked.
I mean, we said right at the beginning of this episode that Alan Watts was bringing Eastern philosophy into the Western world, and that really feels like it's in line with our mission statement here on Radiant Light. We're trying to continue his work. We're kind of a legacy in a way.
Yeah, I feel like he would be.
I hope we're doing right by him now. I feel like I put a bit of pressure on myself by saying that.
But that's the thing. It's not like when you're a Christian, you have this pressure of, am I doing the right thing? And always kind of questioning yourself. Whereas Alan Watts was more trusting of the universe and of himself.
Absolutely. You said that he demystified mysticism for you.
It just sounds really cool, doesn't it? He demystified mysticism. But yeah, it's that thing about treating the philosophy of Buddha or Lao Tzu as a type of psychotherapy. The earliest kinds of psychology, maybe you could say. It's sort of gives you a modern language to connect to the original philosophy. That demystifies, but instead it doesn't totally take away the spirituality. It just gives you a new lens to explain it through, so that people won't say, oh, he's just a kook or something. It's like, no, there's actual scientific evidence that proves Buddhism and Zen work on the mind and reduce stress, and Tai Chi can reduce stress and improve your physical body. Like, people might like to joke about Qi and meditation and stuff, but the fact is it works. It's just a fact, scientific fact. Maybe it's a little bit of placebo, maybe it's a little bit of how much you put into it, you get back from it. But it seems self-evident that it does work.
Well, so much is connected to your breathing as well. Like, I understand that's a huge part of Tai Chi, and obviously I know it's a huge part of meditation as well. And yeah, breathing is a pretty basic fundamental part of good health, you know.
Well, breathing is an involuntary action, so when you focus on it, it doesn't improve it, it just makes you aware of it, and then you're removing the thought process that your mind would normally occupy with. There's a layer of thought, and you can remove that by focusing that thought on something that's involuntary, like breathing, and then you're only focusing on something that's physical and mental and spiritual, and it's all in one. And you come back to that, then you don't have to worry about your mind taking control of the thought process. It's like a hack almost.
Yeah, Watts was ahead of his time, knowing that this was so beneficial for mental health as well, and psychotherapy. the little bit of Buddhism and Zen that we've gone through, I feel like that's really helped me in day-to-day situations as well. You know, specific moments where you could have acted really angrily, you know, somebody kind of cuts in line in front of you in a shop, or something else has gone wrong or not available that you needed, and you're kind of like, okay, you know, just breathe, focus on your breathing. You don't have to react hysterically at this, you know. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, definitely. Was he one of the first guys to talk about meditation that came out of like a Western theological upbringing? He must have been.
Definitely a pioneer, that's for sure. I mean, I can't say for certain that there wasn't somebody that come before him, but like we said right at the beginning, in the historical setting, way ahead of his time.
He actually trained with Carl Jung as well. So he has
really?
kind of a legacy within psychology as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
I don't know the exact details, but I think he definitely met and perhaps worked with Carl Jung, C.G. Jung. He's a famous analytical psychologist who he sort of branched off from Sigmund Freud and created his own style of psychology, which is, to this day, it's quite respected and discussed. And within analytical psychology, they talk about archetypes. And I wanted to mention this because I feel that Alan Watts fits the trickster archetype. He kind of, not in a negative way, like, you know, the Joker or Loki or any of those. You know who those characters are, right?
Tell me a bit more, in layman's terms for our audience.
So every myth has a hero, right?
Mm.
And then the hero needs a villain.
Like a Joker character.
Well, not exactly, actually. That's the tricky thing here is there's a protagonist and antagonist. There's that, you know, Jesus and Satan. This is the clearest example. Yeah. And then there's like the Judas character who's the betrayer or whatever. That's an archetype as well. Okay. But the trickster archetype is more playful. It doesn't choose good or bad. It just plays between the lines, you see? Okay. So the Joker might be evil, quote unquote, but he's a little bit ambiguous too, because he makes you question what is good, what is evil, who's right, who's wrong. Right. And people see that as a threat, so they don't understand it, and they take it as evil from their perspective. Mm. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But he's not good or evil. He's a trickster. He's tricking you into opening your mind to see a bigger picture beyond good and evil, where Nietzsche started this whole trend. You saw Nietzsche, then Freud, and then you have Jung, and Watts is almost he's part of a lineage in a sense.
Wow.
For the real psychology nerds out there.
And that appears to be all we have time for on today's episode. So don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to us on YouTube or whichever platform you listen to your podcast to. And you can even follow us on Instagram too. So until next time, good night, God bless, and namaste.
Namaste Zen.